This is a very high level net neutrality presentation. We're not going to get into some of the core architecture issues, but I'm going to give a high level overview, and Sebastian is going to come in with more of a regional perspective. And we thought it might be better just to open it up for conversation. Okay. So there are many flavors of net neutrality. There may be the conversation, oops, here we go.
You have to do both.
We're multitasking. So that's why we're partners. There are many flavors of net neutrality. In the United States of America right now, there's a massive discussion, over 7.3 million contributions to the Federal Communications Commission alone on the topic, which tells you that there's a competition / interest of the big providers, the little providers, different cable ISPs. Is there something wrong?
Yeah.
Oh. Okay. So from the Internet Society perspective, we've done some internal work with our public policy team and colleagues in the regions. When you look at the discussion on net neutrality, it's a broad and ill-defined term that encompasses a range of policy objectives, including freedom of expression and user choice, as well as business issues including network traffic management, pricing, and overall business models. From our perspective, it's critical to focus on open internetworking. I think you know that the Internet Engineering Task Force is, we are the administrative home, which means, as a colleague of mine yesterday said, Sebastian, we just pretty much help them register for certain things and provide them with funding. They do all their own work. It's a very open standards organization. We are a proud champion of open standards and open internetworking. This would mean that we want to promote interoperability of networks, any type of network, and interfaces, whether it's application interfaces, any parts of the stack, interoperability. Some want to focus on whether and how they can treat packets impartially when they travel across a network. So this would mean that people are making judgments about packets, and we don't support that. Consider how you benefit both network development and consumers by limiting innovation and stifling competition. If you're making a net neutrality decision as a regulator, what are your considerations? How do you benefit both network development and consumers? Is it by limiting innovation and stifling competition? No. You want to encourage innovation and encourage competition as a regulator or a policymaker. Additional considerations? You're looking for something, we believe, that allows for effective competition at the network and services level, provides a diversity of competitive service offerings that are transparent and enable the user to make an informed choice of provider and level of service. This is transparency about network choice, packages, speed, other. We're focused on unimpeded access to a diversity of services, applications, and content offered on a non-discriminatory basis. Comprehensible and readily available information as to service limitations, network and traffic restrictions that the subscriber is subject to, and reasonable network management that is neither anti-competitive nor prejudicial. Oops, hang on. Finally, the principles of open internetworking should be maintained in network upgrades and new deployments of all kinds, we believe. Specialized services delivered over so-called fast lanes must not lead to quality degradation of the normal best effort internet. The way internet traffic works is a lot different than the old telephone network. I think many of you know that. We can get into more of that in a minute. Operators should supply both public and contractual information on the average speeds they actually provide for internet service to their customers during normal and peak times, data volume limitations, and traffic management practices. There are some countries that have put broadband maps up where they've done an analysis of how much the packages cost, who's providing the service. Canada was the first country to do this sort of thing, just so their consumers had more choice to see who was in the region that they lived in, what the network speeds were on offer, and then they could make a comparative analysis. In any event, these are some of the considerations that we're focusing on and some of the principles that we want to promote from a high-level perspective.
Thank you, Jane. I don't have a PowerPoint because I'm here to provide some regional perspectives, and it's quite straightforward because In the region, I mean, the discussion on network neutrality is all around the region. But the problem is, as Jen has just said and defined, we don't agree in what we discuss when we say network neutrality. And we discuss many different things. So one of our main tasks now is trying to bring some order into that discussion. I mean, in order to discuss the same. I mean, if otherwise you wouldn't get results. I mean, if you are trying to compare pears and apples, I mean, it's impossible. So one thing that we're working a lot in many, from the region, I mean, there's a lot of discussions. There's only 2 countries that did something regarding this. One is Chile. Chile has a network neutrality law, specific, which is a partial one. I would refer in a few minutes to that. Also, Brazil included some provisions on network neutrality into one overarching law they passed called the Internet Civil Framework, Marco Civil Internet, which was a big discussion. I don't know if you followed on Twitter, but it was a very interesting and really big discussion among the Brazilians. Many good things into this Brazilian framework, internet framework, and there is also a provision for network neutrality, which is not implemented yet because it has to be implemented. So the details are still unknown on how it's going to be implemented by the government. There is basically as Chen said, when we discuss about network neutrality, we discuss about many things, and we mix the discussions a lot. There is some freedom, even, I mean, the dimension of freedom of expression get together. I mean, let's try to focus for a minute into a more defined concept. And from our perspective, that thing that is called network neutrality has 3 main characteristics that has to be discussed. One is purely technical, how you treat the bits. This famous phrase, all the bits should be treated equally, otherwise it's in a non-discriminatory basis, and you cannot discriminate the bits. I mean, they're not person. I mean, so they're not subject to human rights. I mean, so, and many of you are technical guys. You cannot assume that you are not going to treat any bit in a different way. You should and you must treat them in a different way. So let's not be that radical when we make these announcements. We strongly believe in there should be non-discrimination in the networks. But it's not that you should treat every single bit in the same way. There is circumstances where you might want to treat them in a different way. But as Jane said, should be not in an anti-competitive way or prejudicial. That's the 2 keys. So we have one technical dimension, how we manage the network, and one consumer protection dimension, which is how transparent is what we do with our networks to our users, and a competition dimension, which is this practice, the way I'm managing my network, creating an advantage for some players over some other players, creating some anti-competitive environment in where we work. The Chilean law basically deals with the 2 last points. I mean, with consumer protection and the protection of the competition. And basically, it's a quality of services, if I may. I mean, it's a law that aims specifically to inform transparently the users the conditions of the service their providers are giving to them, which is great. And it's a very important component of the regulatory framework that we aspire. I mean, transparency to the consumers. That's one of the main issues, as well as competition. Competition should be also focused. our main, Jane defined well, I mean, our main aim is to preserve an environment for innovation. And that's the main characteristic that every network neutrality regulation, law, discussion has to have in mind when it's discussed in our perspective. So, in general, I forgot to say, in the technical side, we consider that network management is good when it's or is allowed when it's legitimate. What we mean with legitimate in that case is there's also two dimensions. One is to preserve the integrity and safety of the network. That would be one. And the second one is obvious, is to comply with a law or with a judicial order or something like that. So basically, in our perspective, simple rules for happy users should be a minimum broadband speed guaranteed for the users in peak hours, no application-specific blocking or throttling, no destination-specific throttling or blocking, and any single limitation to the service should be transparently communicated to the users. I think if we, in our perspective, if we comply with these four basic principles, we can have a really good network that could comply with the objective, the goal of preserving this environment of growth, innovation, and these capabilities that the internet has. That's basically roughly my intervention. So I'm open to questions now. Thank you very much.
And to bring it back from a broader perspective, also, Sebastian made the point yesterday that public policy is clearly in the domain of governments, and we work closely with governments around the world. But as stakeholder community working together, we hope that to inform a debate. And when you're looking at trying to innovate in your country, bring better services, bring better networks, allow innovation, allow someone to develop an application, permissionless innovation, as Vint Cerf would say, who's one of the founders of the Internet Society, that doesn't mean that you don't allow to pay attention to intellectual property laws, but permissionless innovation means you're allowed to innovate as long as you're not doing harm to the infrastructure and you're interoperable and you're not, again, no harm in interoperability. As a policymaker and a regulator, you're thinking about what's better for your country. And if you are giving one network an advantage over another just because different innovation and services are flowing on top, that's a little complicated, because does that mean if you're going to stop Viber, you're going to stop Skype? Does it mean somebody can't come up with a new innovative phone-to-computer technology? I was chatting with someone the other day. I used to do work in ITUT Study Group 3, which is charging, accounting, and tariffing. 12 years ago, there was a discussion about something called alternative calling procedures. It was phone-to-computer callback. Are we back to that? That's the question I have, because I've seen different proposals coming forward in different fora about, oh, that's not allowed, it's a telecom service, it's this, it's that. At the end of the day, regulators are changing. What is it that you're now managing? You're managing competition, you're managing innovation, you're trying to do what's good for the country. You may have to forbear more because the services aren't delivered the same way. Internet traffic, best effort, is not the same as end-to-end on a phone call across the Atlantic or from here to Miami. That was different before. With internet services and the capabilities that are allowed through the innovation, we've got great potential, but the question is, do we want to throttle the potential? I gave up on Netflix at home in the US because my traffic was being throttled on wireless. So I think I probably look at the computer 24 hours a day, so I don't need to watch Netflix. But the question is, why is my traffic being throttled? It was being throttled so I wouldn't use the service. So the question is that a good thing? I think it was Sebastian who said, Jane, can't you talk to the FCC? And I said, what? I can, and I can put in a complaint. They're pretty busy right now, I think, with the broader objectives of their analysis. But this is happening, and the question is that good for consumers? Is that what you want? So it's a fundamental question at the highest policy levels as well. Do you want to push forward? I mean, we heard today from the oil industry how important networks are to them and what they do. Are you going to try and prioritize their traffic when they might have a guy who's out on a rig who needs an emergency service? That would be tricky. So.
Okay, Jane, I don't want you to go too fast because basically the next session we will be dealing on some very specific discussions going on, especially here in the Caribbean. For example, OTT. So, I mean, this session is for us to give an introduction with respect to the topic.
Yep.
And in the next session, we will just go a bit more in depth with respect to that. So, I would like to keep it a bit high level, and then we go into the more in depth. So, is there any questions with respect to this net neutrality principles? Yes, Dexter, please. Is there a microphone?
My question is directed at either one of you. I recently participated in a forum where a named mobile operator explained why, from a traffic perspective, they manage the traffic on their network. The basic premise was that 5% of their users who download videos from YouTube or whatever utilize so much bandwidth on their network that they degrade the service of other users who may not necessarily be using Hulu or whatever. Would you care to comment on, now it was specific to a mobile operator, but would you care to comment on how you would, that issue?
Yeah, I have, because the same happens in fixed broadband too. The heavy users. And there is a question, I have a question for you. Sorry to answer with a question, but I mean, if 5% of the users consume 70% of the bandwidth, and we are charging all of them the same, are we doing the right stuff? I mean, so my point is, this is a commercial problem more than a technical problem. I mean, apparently their prices are not set in the right way, and it's not a network management problem from a technical perspective. So I would add a pinch of salt, or see it in other under some other different umbrella. I mean. And not as a network neutrality. It's a very recovering argument, but I just still don't get it. I mean, I think it's a commercial. That is a commercial problem. And if we're talking about network neutrality, we're not talking about business model. Like we are supposed to talk about technical issues. That's what I would say to this. I'm not replying to you, obviously, in this way. To this operator that was complaining to you.
And I'd add, absolutely, with the perspective that Sebastian is offering from a commercial perspective. I used to work for an operator. If you haven't foreseen what's going on in the market, shame on you. Devices now are voice, video, and data. I mean, if you buy a new smartphone, it's all of these services. So are you not upgrading the capacity in your network? I mean, that's the question. And what's your long-term business planning to put that money back into the infrastructure? Because as Sebastian is saying, there's a way to manage some of that traffic, but again, it's not a management issue, because you can manage that traffic. If you've got high users, you can figure that out. There's peak, there's low peak times. But again, is this a complaint from a competitiveness perspective to slow down the other operators who may be providing those services? So if in the old world when I worked at AT&T, people would just throw out complaints so that they would slow down the competition. And that's not good overall. And I'm just saying that from a perspective that I knew, and I'm just throwing that out. But it's important to think about a high-level investment. And I know it's hard if you're running a network. This isn't magic. You've got to get the money into the infrastructure. You've got to deploy new nodes. It's not it's not easy, but it's something to think about.
Yeah, and it's quite more simple. I mean, I used to work in the private sector too, and if I have 5% of the customers that I don't like and they produce a lot of cost in my networks, I'm losing money with these customers, so I don't want them. And that would solve your whole network issue. I mean, yeah, I don't want to. I mean, if I'm a commercial operator, I don't want to lose money with you. Yeah, either you pay me more or go with your business somewhere else. Yeah, yeah, but let's not make this network neutrality big fuss around that. I mean, it's much, humbly, it's much more simple than that.
I think there was a question over there. Yes.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Marcus Sanatan. I remember one of the slides I saw the mention of a fast lane, and the developments of net neutrality and discussion in America is actually quite monitored and quite well known. And one of the principles mentioned was also not blocking application specific. But then with a fast lane, you won't actually technically be blocking it, you'd just be charging more for it. So I actually want to know, what your opinion, is it actually possible for a fast lane to exist and still have net neutrality at all?
It could be possible for fast lanes to exist if it's regulated in a certain way. And right now, you can choose to have higher bandwidth through certain cable providers or certain other operators. Wireless, it depends on where you are, quite frankly. My parents live in the northern part of the United States in the east. I have to go to the end of the driveway with my phone and hold it up to try and get a signal, so I'm definitely not downloading video on that phone, right? It depends. That's not a fast lane, but there could be a regulatory parameter there. I think this is the key thing that the FCC is trying to figure out. If you create a fast lane, then who's allowed to be in the lane? And then you're picking and choosing, and then making it harder for the smaller guys to meet that parameter. So if we go back to the whole, are you running your traffic well? Are you managing your network well? Are you providing good services? People will come to you if you are. I've had T-Mobile for almost 10 years just because they provided more service around the world. They may not have been the best at one point in time, but they bought $4.3 billion worth of spectrum in the United States about 5 years ago. They're upgrading their networks. I'm glad they hung in there because they're a good competitor and they provided a better service in certain parts. But are you now going to say that they can't be in the fast lane? Or that if they're in the fast lane, they only provide this type of service? Or you can't provide that type of application? And picking and choosing is very complicated because some of the applications are going to get faster. And they may not slow down, quote, the network the way people think they are. And I guess one of the key things that people often say is, don't regulate. How do you regulate into the future? That's a complicated one, right?
Yeah, I think I agree. And as long as there is no harm to the regular best effort internet service as we know it, I see no problem with fast lanes. My only problem with the fast lanes is that from a technical standpoint, they're so complicated to create that probably make no commercial sense. I mean, and best effort will make much more commercial, because, I mean, let's be honest, best effort works as quality of service most of the time. I mean, it's only the exception where the quality of the quality of the network in a best effort is not 100%. I mean, you drop a lot of packets, or your latency becomes enormous. That's the exception on the internet. So for most of the services, best effort is almost the same as quality of service assured. So creating on top of that fast lanes is so complicated that, in my perspective, we will not see them because it makes no commercial sense at the end of the day.
Do you remember the, I think it was the low Earth orbiting satellites back in the 90s? Money was put into these networks, and all of a sudden, poof, mobile phones. That, bam, okay, this is going to be a much better satellite network, and I worked with some of these people in the past, but you can't forecast at times. So if you're going to kill off companies or do other things because you think this is the right way to go, you could do more harm to your infrastructure and to the competitiveness of the country. And that's just something I think every country wants to encourage.
Are there any other questions? Okay, Mr. Echeverria.
Sebastian, you say that the Chilean law is mainly focused in the issue of transparency. So do you think that it should be an initiative that could be replicated in other countries? Is positive to have this kind of law? Could be an example?
Yeah, absolutely. And I thought I mentioned that. I mean, I think that's one of the components that are key for this relationship. Mostly because we don't know how the internet is, the networks are going to develop in the future. In this case, I mean, an overview from the authorities is, I mean, and the transparency vis-a-vis the users is key. Yeah, absolutely. I think everything that increases transparency and openness is good for this. So I totally agree with that. Thank you.
Jane, would like to comment maybe?
I just add a perspective. Years ago in 96, 97, there was a major debate. It came out of the Uruguay round, looking at Raul, who's from Uruguay, and Sebastian, who lives there. This was the basic reference paper offering that came through the WTO, the World Trade Organization. And the designation of basic and value added was very different in 96, 97. Basic services were regulated services phone. Value added were computer services. And the reason in so many countries that they kept those designations is so that the computer networks and the IP-based networks could grow. And I'm not pointing to the United States as the best out there in class, trust me, on regulatory issues, because we have a very different market. But if you look at the computer 1, 2, and 3 proceedings in the United States, and there was something called the Stevens Act, that was all done to forbear because they weren't sure where the networks were going. They weren't sure where technology was taking them. So they wanted to not do harm to that potential growth in that industry, and they still needed to figure out what to do on the basic telecom side. If you're still going to use those designations now in the environment we're in, that's complicated because there was a whole different mindset at the time as to what basic and value added were. I do know the WTO is taking a look at some of this now, and it could be super complicated because it's going to take a lot more technical conversation. But the bottom line is, if you use those old designations from 96, 97, when people were putting together the basic reference interconnection offers, and to Sebastian's point, part of the deal on all those RIOs, the reference interconnection offers in that world at the time, was transparency, separation from government and operations, right? Putting out your information online if you could, or to your consumers in paper format back then. But the idea was inform people, let them choose, try and promote innovation. It's also important for your economies. So there's that economic impact of a better infrastructure, and you saw that from the company we're from today. I think it wasn't HP. What was the company?
Honeywell.
Yeah, Honeywell. How would they operate if they had to pick and choose between fast and slow? So the question is, you've got a great industry here, and you've got lots of different services that are being offered in different market buckets. You know, what's your integrated approach? So take those old designations and think of a fresh way to deal with it, because that old, the basic and value added is complicated, and if you regulate based on that, you could cause some, I think, some disruption potentially.
Claire, question?
I must say I don't know very much about net neutrality, but there seems to be a lot of discussion around the topic and the role of the regulator. But again, is this something that, is there room for multi-stakeholderism with respect to this area?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that question. Yeah, we tend to be repetitive about that, but we always see room for multi-stakeholder approach. And has to do with something that Jane has just said. Has to do with taking informed decisions, and there is a certain levels of expertise in many of us coming from different stakeholders groups that can inform the decision of the other. As I said yesterday, no one wants to take over the role of governments in deciding what the public policy is, but we want just to inform the decision of the regulator, of the government in general, because we carry out our own expertise. So I think in that sense, in a collaborative and open, transparent way, there is always room for a multi-stakeholder approach where we can discuss, and every stakeholder has to do what it has to do, but knowing the position of the other stakeholders. So that's absolutely, I totally agree. There is room for that.
Are there other questions? No? I know basically we would like to jump, let's say, to the next session, but let's just take a coffee break, just relax a bit, and then we can go to the next session. Well, we will be addressing real-life discussions going on right now in the Caribbean. So let's just take a coffee break to relax a bit, and then we'll be doing that. Thank you.